One, two. Oh, okay. Hello, everyone. Hi. Please take your seats. The conference is about to start in a minute. Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this panel on diversity and inclusion in the European film market, organized by Collectif 50/50 and ARTEF. I'm Joanna Maccabi, member of the board of 50/50, and I will moderate this discussion today. So to start, we will have an introduction by Antoine Boilet of ARCOM, and Quentin Delot of Collectif 50/50 about data-driven studies in France. Please welcome them.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great honor for me to be with you today and to discuss this essential issue on behalf of the ARCOM, the French regulator of the audiovisual and digital communication. Excuse me in advance for my French accent. I will try to do my best. As an introduction of our panel, I am going to talk about the annual diversity barometer set up by the ARCOM to help the media to improve the global representation on screen. And it starts with the genesis of the ARCOM's mission, formerly known as CSA. In 1999, an association fighting against discrimination publicly alerted the CSA about the underrepresentation of black people on screen and asked the Council to address this issue. In 2006, the law known as the Law of Equal Opportunities introduced the obligation for the CSA to ensure that the media reflects the diversity of the French society. The Diversity Barometer was created in 2009, and year after year, the barometer was followed by other additional tools dealing with the representation of population categories, with a key focus on women's representation and image in the media and also in advertising, as well as our diversity is treated within news program. What are our main challenges? Under the law, ethnical statistics are forbidden in France, as it is impossible to precisely measure the level of racial diversity in the society. The same thing goes for the media. This is why all our studies results are solely based on perception. This is a key aspect of our work and methodology. Another precision is that we comply with an important characteristic of the French audiovisual law, the freedom of the audiovisual communication and the freedom of creation. So this barometer is a flexible tool to change things on screen collectively. Lastly, it's important to note that the ARCOM's mission only apply on screen and on air representation. Moving ahead to the methodology of this barometer. Each year, we analyze broadcast programs on the main TV channels released during 2 weeks from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m., which is the time slot with the largest audience. Every type of programs, except advertising, is screened. Fiction, news, magazine, documentary, entertainment, sports. And the study hinges on over more than 1,200 hours of broadcast and 40,000 speaking characters. In our perception-centric barometer, the speaking characters are classified according to quantitative criteria: ethnic origin, gender, profession, disability, if any, age, place of residence, socioeconomic situation. We also take into account qualitative criteria, the status, whether he or she is a hero, an antagonist, a main character, or a secondary character, and the attitude, whether the speaking character has a positive, negative, or neutral attitude. Every result is compared to the French population except for the ethnic origin. Going to the next slide, here is what we found. Here is. Excuse me. It's difficult to everything, to manage my French accent and after the slides. It's a challenge. Thank you, thank you. So here is what we found. People viewed as non-white are only 14% of all speaking characters in 2021. This rate has never been upper than 17% since the beginning of the barometer. As you can see, it is the second part of the slide, this percentage doubles, that is to say 27%, when it comes to illegal or fringe activities on screen. It's a telling example that much more needs to be done regarding representation in the media. But it is reassuring to notice that when you look at 2020 figures, the same representation for this type of activities was of 43%. Another relevant and positive trend in 2021 that is not mentioned in this slide, when you consider the hero roles, the proportion of non-white is higher than the one of white people. It is the first time in this barometer. This is why we at ARCOM are convinced of the part and the impact of such tool. More and more, we manage collectively to move lines and to foster an editorial approach in which positive, successful, aspirational characters are played by non-white people, but much is still at stake. On the next graph, you can see that women, who still represent half of the French population, are still underrepresented on French television. I would like to add, on a positive note, that thanks to this long-term barometer and the work and the action of associations such as le Collectif 50-50, we collectively managed to increase women representation in front and behind cameras, programs hosting, debate specialists and experts, programs and films direction, typology of characters in fiction and films. On this graph, we can clearly see the disparity between the French society reality and its depiction on television. Less than 1% of disabled people on screen. Also less than 1% of people in situation of poverty. 4% of people living in the French suburbs. So as a conclusion, I expect the timing is okay? Okay, thank you. Wow. As a conclusion, every story deserves and needs to be told on screens. Anyone, no matter their race, gender, sexual orientation, etc., deserve to be seen and represented on screens. It's really about creating and building bridges, connection, and conversations between the creative minds and makers of programs and the millions of people watching their creations. This is why it's crucial to work hand in hand with all the actors of the sector, all the actors of the media, to improve all these results. It is a responsibility of the media industry and our global responsibility to build together a more inclusive and tolerant society. This is also a key issue to improve the trust of populations towards media. Indeed, more diversity brings more audience, especially for the youngest generations, and it is nothing but a democratical challenge and issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Antoine.
Hello, everyone. Sorry. Thanks a lot for being here, and thank you, Antoine, for this enlightening introduction. My name is Quentin. I'm a board member of the Collectif 50-50 and independent consultant in digital development. I would like to take the next 5 minutes to show you a few insights from the study Sinégalité, which was released by the Collective last year. As mentioned by the ARCOM, such studies have existed since 2009 for the French TV landscape, but actually there was nothing until 2022 when it comes to French cinema. So we're very glad we actually made and released this this picture. Can you hear me when I stand like this? Because I'm a bit... No? Okay. I'm gonna... Sounds good. Anyway, so this study aims at measuring inequalities in terms of representation on screen. First of all, why did we measure that? So, we believe that representation on cinema screens creates a collective imaginary of our society. Of course, cinema doesn't always have to reflect reality, but if what we see on screen is biased, what if we change, we believe that change can be made off screen with a better, more representative industry in order to better represent the cultural wealth of our society. So that's the why. That being said, how did we build the study? So we took the 100 top grossing and top budget majority French films released in 2019 in theaters, and we measured the perception of diversity. Perception of diversity, which is legally allowed because we're analyzing fiction. Analyzing reality, what we see on our screens. So I'm going to share a few insights from this very rich 100-page study to introduce the upcoming panels. So here are 5 main indicators that we find particularly relevant. First of all, when it comes to gender, 62% of main characters in the corpus of film we analyzed are perceived as cisgender men. Only 38% of them of main characters are cisgender females, and unfortunately there's transgender main characters are totally out of the picture. So that's gender only. Then we started crossing criteria. If we cross gender and age, we see the sadly famous tunnel for women over 50, and to be more precise, between 50 and 64, where actually we only have 12% of women on screen from this age range within main characters versus 88% of men, all of them cisgender. So that's gender and age. Third indicator, if we cross gender and perceived origin of the character, not of the comedian, of the character, we see that character perceived as non-white are more often men. We have 11% are perceived as black versus 7% for women, for instance. So meanwhile, 81% of women characters are perceived as white, which is pretty groundbreaking. When it comes to sexual orientation, first of all, it's something that is clearly stated by the characters in 82%, for 82% of them. So among these 82%, there's a crushing 95% of characters who are heterosexual. Bisexual characters, who account for 3% of them, are mainly white women. And same goes for the 2% of homosexual characters, who are mainly white Parisian males. So for this last slide, we focused on what we call in France socio-professional category. And we see that characters with lower skill jobs are more often seen in comedies than dramas. There's also an overrepresentation of, let's say, executives in higher skilled jobs, with more than 50% of characters in this category, when in France they actually represent less than 20% of the active population. So, of course, I strongly suggest you to come and read the full story on the Collectif 50-50's website, where we also analyze handicap, geography, representation of delinquency and crime, nudity, film genre, etc. And also, this study points out that in the 15 films with the biggest production budget, there are less non-white main characters than in the average of the films of the corpus we analyzed. On the other hand, on the top 15 films which did the biggest box office, there are twice as much non-white characters as the corpus of analyzed films. So, less non-white characters in the films that were better financed, twice as much non-white characters in the films that people actually went to see. I believe this tells us a lot about what moviegoers actually want to see on their screens. So at the risk of repeating myself, representation, what we see on screen, shapes an imaginary story of our society. And we believe that lacking representation in our industry actually alters this imaginary, and it has an impact on film funding, which alters this imaginary story. So this is what we're going to talk about in this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antoine. Thank you, Quentin. So we are now welcoming on stage our three panelists from Europe, from other countries in Europe. We have Elge Albers from Moin Filmförderung. Melanie Oyes from the British Film Institute. And Rico Johnson-Sinclair from the Anti-Racism European Task Force film, ARTEF. So, this panel would not have been possible without ARTEF, because ARTEF invited us at the last Berlinale at the initiative of Temba Bebe and Faisal Omar on the Inclusion and Equity Pathway Seminar. So, Rico, can you tell us more about this seminar? Absolutely. And what happened?
Absolutely. So for those of you that don't know, ARTEF is the Anti-Racist Taskforce for European Film. We largely focus on the what, the how, and the why. So we develop training and work with organizations across Europe, specifically focused on film and screen industries. And so we were invited in partnership with the European film market, EFM at Las Berlinale, to develop almost like a project to really bring all of those funds together to make commitments to diverse work, to inclusive work. And so that took place on the 18th of February earlier this year. The idea was that we would invite grassroots movements, as well as well-known film funds, as well as people in positions of power to really sit down and drill into what they feel empowered to do in their organizations. And off the back of that, we hope to come up with 5 tangible actions that over the next 3 years would be implemented across all of the funds present and all of the people in positions of powers organizations that were present. What I will comment on is there weren't a lot of funds there. So actually it became a really interesting conversation between people in positions of power, organizations that weren't institutional funds, and grassroots movements, people working on the ground, people that were finally empowered to speak about the issues that they face. And from the back of that, we did come up with 5 sort of tangible things that we were going to move back forward with, and there was talk of a follow-up event to really crystallize what that looks like.
Thank you. So, following the introduction by Quentin and Antoine, I want to ask a question for everybody about data-driven studies. How do you think those studies contribute to achieving greater parity and representation in the European film and audiovisual sector?
So I had like a flashback to 2016 looking at those, because I started at the BFI doing a diversity data research project about black actors on screen, and also had gender in that, and whether people were lead roles or supporting roles, and the numbers are exactly the same. So I was having sort of flashbacks, PTSD. But I think what's important about the work and what I took from my background is research, and doing things with knowledge is always better than sort of fighting around in the dark for answers to things. And what I found about that research is the ability to be able to go into a conversation about diversity and inclusion and start with, so what are we going to do about it? As opposed to, well, is that a problem? How many people are we really talking about here? So when you see those numbers are so stark and they don't match up to reality, so the argument that we have that we're just reflecting how it is, and in our statistics, we only had sort of 14% of doctors on screen represented by women, when actually in the UK 52% of our general doctors are women. That's not reflecting reality. So that ability to start the conversation at this is where we are and where do we want to get to is sort of really important. And the data is not the be all and end all. It doesn't answer everything. If you're just doing data, you're not doing diversity and inclusion, but it does allow you to start from an informed position and base your actions around knowledge, which I think is super important.
Yeah, and just to
haven't even started yet.
And just to add to that, it's really easy for those things that have been implemented to be rolled back if it isn't rooted in data. The thing is, inclusion work, whether that be anti-racism or any anti-discriminatory work, it's really easy for those qualities that we gain to be rolled back unless that work is really sustained. Having it against data allows you to check in with the data and really see where you are, rather than have it be physical, have it be the kind of perspectives of your audience rather than something ingrained in the actual data.
Yeah, it holds you accountable, because if you don't know where you are, how can you get anywhere? You don't know where you're going to, you don't know whether it's really working. And what I found before we had data was that people were saying, you know, but I think it's better because I saw that black guy on TV once, and I'm like, name another one. So the sort of perception, or even if you're seeing that on screen, you know, what's happening off screen, is that really changing things, or are we talking about adding numbers? And the numbers aren't the whole story. So it was really interesting to me that you did the same work around sort of lead actors and profession, because that was exactly how we were trying to also assess the sort of quality of roles that people are allowed to play on screen. So
you want to answer?
Yeah, I just can add quickly. I'm super grateful for the work you've done on that data, because it makes it so much clearer from what basis we're working on. And I was very curious to drill into that a little bit more and just understand better how that sort of clusters against the budgets and the industry. For us as a fund, that's a basis to work from, to understand which films are, you know, composed in which way, which dimensions of diversity are included in what clusters of the industry. So the more we understand, the more information we have on that, the easier it is for us to take action or to work from. So thanks very much for providing it, first of all.
Yeah. And I actually have a question for you, Helga, as the managing director of More in Film Fundero. How do you perceive the role of film funding organization in promoting diversity and inclusion in the European film industry?
Well, film funds are instrumental in the European film funding, and we are spending a lot of public money. So I think we have a central role in also making sure that there's fair access to that money. And for us as a fund, we have different ways of operating. We're seen as gatekeepers mostly, I think, and I'd like to think that we can also be gate openers. and to think of it from that perspective opens a lot of new routes of looking at how we act as film funds. And I mean, for us, that sort of pans out on the decision-making process, understanding who's involved in the decision-making process, as well as the application process. Who are we addressing to? How do we address different groups of applicants, possible applicants that we haven't actually addressed or that haven't perceived us as possible partners? How do we design our interfaces? And so on. So there's a lot of possibilities we have as funds to work towards a fairer representation off-screen and on-screen, both. I'm convinced that once we work on off-screen, on-screen will also follow, and it will have an effect on it. So our primary instinct as a fund would be to work on the structural situation of film funding, and from bettering that, hopefully and pretty surely also the on-screen representation will change.
And can you tell us more about the Omni Inclusion platform project?
Yeah, I can. Omni is a project we have introduced this year, and it's an initiative we are co-developing with a number of institutions from the German industry, and is focusing on collecting diversity data. So what we're basically building is a survey tool that works on a couple of core principles, which are, first of all, it has to be very easy to use and very quick. Secondly, it has to be safe in terms of data security. Thirdly, it has to be anonymous, and thirdly, it has to provide data that's useful for the industry. Fourthly, and so we are building this with stakeholder groups within Germany, with the Black filmmakers community, with Pro Quote, like your equivalent in Germany from the 50/50 Collectif. And the German Film Academy and a number of public funds. Hessen Film Funding is here. I see them there, and so on. It's about 35 institutions that are involved in designing something that really works for the industry in Germany, and provides data that is then to be available to work from something. Because so far we don't have any information. Really, I mean, it's very much based on perception, as you said. It's very much based, it's very anecdotal, it's very emotional from time to time, and to boil down the situation to data level, I think is very important to have an informed conversation of how we want to move ahead, and that's what we're doing in a legal framework that's not so different from the French legal framework. So there are certain questions that you're not necessarily allowed to ask, unless people would like to answer them anyways. And so that is the core idea, is to provide a tool that makes it so easy and is so clear why those questions should be asked, that people are open to do it.
Thank you. And I have another question for Melanie. So you are the head of inclusion at the British Film Institute. And I wonder, what strategy and collaborations do you believe are essential to ensure access, equity and inclusion within the UK film sector? And how can this practice could be shared and implemented on an international level?
I mean, that's a tiny question, isn't it?
It is.
I should have brought my whole strategy for you to read beforehand. I mean, I think my philosophy, and as a team, I think the most important thing around the work that we do is that we're open and authentic and honest about the work that we have to do. So a lot of what we do is just about having those conversations in a way that people can get on board with, or not, as the case may be. I don't really mind either way, but like, we want to be able to have that conversation and start from a place of honesty and sort of, you know, as I was saying with the data, kind of like, this is where we are, this is what we'd like to do, and in the right way. So that's the kind of first and foremost thing. Also around, you know, the communities that we are aiming to help and include in our industry. What do they need, and how can we help to provide it? What are the barriers that we can help to break down or shift or disrupt to allow people to partake in the things that, as a publicly funded body, they should be able to partake in with us? We also believe in the disability saying, nothing about us without us. So a lot of the work that we do, most of the work that we do, is in partnership with people who are already doing amazing work in this area anyway. that do it outside of us, that do it from a grassroots level, that can teach us way more than I'm ever going to be able to teach them about how this work should be done and the ways in which they can do it outside of an institutional framework. So often that's about empowering them in whatever way that is, whether that's with funding or giving them access to our spaces or our opportunities. What else? What else do we do? What else happens? Who am I?
we work intersectionally.
So Rico's also on my team, by the way. I'm not just like throwing it over to a random person.
We try to work intersectionally with everything we do. So whilst we consider inclusion and there are specific focuses in our work at the BFI, we do look at things intersectionally, understanding that some people are queer and black, some people are disabled and South Asian, and there are specific needs to specific communities. Equally, there are specific needs for specific countries. So we can say black people have needs and black people do have needs, but the needs of black African diaspora, it's not the same as the black Caribbean. The needs of the Indian diaspora are not the same as the Pakistani diaspora. And so what are those specific needs and how do we drill down into that? And that gives us a more equitable way of working with historically minoritized people. So that's where we're at mentally.
And I think it's also, so everything we're doing is trying to disrupt. You know, the work that we're doing, the way that we're working doesn't work for diversity and inclusion. So everything that we're trying to do is ask questions of why things are the way they are and if we can disrupt them and why those things are in place and keeping out these people, does that have to be the way? And so we try and find ways constantly to sort of circumvent those things or break down those barriers completely. So there's that. And I think really, if you're talking about how you can take that into everything I've talked about, has got nothing to do with a British context. That's all about philosophy. It's about embedding this thought and work into everything that you're doing. Rico and I are always talking about the fact that if everybody did this in their work and thought in the way that we think, which is who isn't in the room and why, like why is that happening, that we just would finally be out of a job, right? We were just saying this to people just now. So like we would finally be out of a job and could go and rest on a beach or something. So I think our work is to embed that thinking and practice and thought about how can you just do something? What one thing can you do in your context that would make a difference in this way that is not for us to deliver, actually. It's for everybody collaboratively to do and push the dial forward.
Thank you. And Rico, so you also are working with the ARTEF, Anti-Racism Taskforce for European Films. What initiative or approach have you found to be effective in promoting representation and expansion of visibility and underrepresented community in the film festivals and cultural events, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things that we're doing a lot of at the moment, alongside ARTEF, is training. And the thing is about the work that we're trying to get off the ground, the anti-racist work, we want to do it collaboratively. And so whilst we do have a transparent approach with film festivals, with filmmakers, a lot of our processes are confidential because we don't want to create the dynamics of which those, the pressures, the external pressures will actually kind of decrease the work or mitigate the work. We also, in part of our training, we do anti-racist training to get everyone's knowledge to the same place. So what is the difference between systemic and institutional racism? What's the difference between colour blindness and overt and aversive racism? And the thing is, the language has evolved in such a way over the last 50 years, starting 50 years ago, but really coming to a genesis with the digital age, because historically marginalized communities could finally have large conversations with people on other sides of the world, so we can begin to develop our own language instead of having language that's inherently white and has been given to us by white people. Like the term racism was invented by white people to talk about an experience that wasn't white. And so, yeah, developing training, developing understanding, working with filmmakers, working with film funds, everything we do, we want it to be collaborative because we realize we're all on a journey together. Obviously, the realities of our industry is that it has systemic and institutional problems. The biggest indicator of white supremacy in our society is the fact we still refer to minorities as minorities when actually they make up 85% of the world's population. So So hopefully working together we can move the dial slightly, start to think about representation, start to think about curatorial justice, and start to think about authentic authorship, who has the right to tell what stories, and how are we making sure that whilst the filmmakers are remunerated for their time, that stories that talk about minoritized communities are remunerating those communities, especially if those stories hinge on trauma.
And to be back in the French context, Antoine, as you are working at Arcom, but you have a background in the French broadcaster France Télévisions. What measure do you believe could be implemented at the regulatory and supervisory level to encourage diversity and inclusion in the audiovisual and film sector in France and Europe?
Yeah. Wow, 2 hours. Maybe to answer, I would like to share four convictions on this issue. My first conviction is that the main key success factor is the will and the ambition at the top of the media organizations to take risk, to move lines of the representations in our programs. And one telling example, this week, France 2, the French public sector, broadcasted in prime time a 2-hour documentary, Homo en France, that is to say LGBT in France, the day before the International LGBTQI+ Day, or when TF1, the first private channel in France, created last year a new series whose name is Lycée Toulouse-Lautrec, an high school in charge of disabled students. The same thing with France Télévisions with season 1 of Drag Race France. So the first conviction is the will to change things. The second, because diversity brings audience. The second maybe conviction, the creation of a global ecosystem characterized by the collective commitment to work together to move lines. In this context, Joanna, you have a very important part, that is to say the part of producers of the new generations is absolutely essential. You have the tools and the skills to build these new inclusion bridges. Third conviction, maybe the involvement and the contribution of the regulator and the civil society, Collectif 50-50, etc., to create, I would say, a global and communication panorama and system that permits to count, that permits to analyze trends, to put real pressure on actors, to name and shame, sometimes, to raise awareness and foster innovation and change. And last conviction, maybe, for the actors and the regulator, the need to address these issues with nuance, trying to gather a large audience and complying in France with the values of the Republic.
Thank you. Quentin, you have anything to add? No? Okay. Yeah, we will have some time for questions. I have a lot of long questions, but I will start with another. I was just wondering, in 2023, right now, what are the main challenges that your organizations are facing with the current states of European policies and everything happening?
Oh, I had to work on this panel. I was like, I'm just going to turn up and talk some stuff. It'll be fine. I mean, I think the main challenges are the same across all of us, and have been the same for a really long time. Because what we're talking about is really embedded systemic issues that lead to holding people out of you know, an industry that was set up in a very elitist way, and so it serves a very small amount of people who are having a lovely time. And so, you know, you're trying to open that up and break that down. I think actually what is useful in the context that we're in terms of the industry at the moment, is that we have skill shortages. You know, that we're in trouble as a independent film sector. It's the money is less, you know, in the UK anyway. There's competition from streamers, from other platforms where audiences are going to see themselves in different ways that they're not finding themselves in film, which actually is useful for the work that we do, because finally it's sort of like, well, we can't really afford to be exclusive, right? Like, what are we doing? The industry will not continue if we're not including as many people as possible to help make the best products and gather those audiences that we're not reaching. So I think in a lot of ways, actually, the conversation has become easier from a position of sort of fear and worry about the sustainability of our industry, which before, when it was kind of everybody was a bit more comfortable, it's a bit harder to get people to sort of get off the yacht and, you know, do this work. So I think, yeah, that's been sort of interesting that actually you're kind of going in and people have been like, help us, we don't know, we know we need to do this, and like, how do we do that in the right way?
I mean, speaking from the German perspective, I think the biggest chance and the biggest challenge alike is the demographic change that we are looking at in the next 5 to 10 years, I would say, which will lead to Germany becoming one of the oldest societies in Europe, and at the same time having a totally different demographic than we had like 20, 30 years ago. And that's a divide building up that's not easy to bridge. That comes with a gap of acceptance at one end of the society, and at the same time comes with diversity as almost a commodity or something that you don't have to explain to the younger demographic, and a demand for diversity that is also there. So there are different realities in the same world, and to bridge them and to manage certain expectations is also part of what we do, and is a big challenge, I feel. But there's also big chances in the sense that I see that in a city like Hamburg, where our fund is based, we now have about 50% of school kids with migrant backgrounds in one way or another. And this is the generation of filmmakers we will need to address too in the next 5 to 10 years. This is the generation of audiences that will be our future audiences. And to understand that and to prepare ourselves to build a world for this audience is our job, I think. And that's what we're working on at the moment. And that's a challenge as much as it is also a chance, I would say.
I think for us, it's externally people's expectations of what we should be as an organisation. I think that something that needs to be clarified about ARTEF is that whilst we work with organisations, we don't work for organisations, we work for black and global majority people, and sometimes that can seem quite contentious, and as a result we are a small steering group with 2 directors and not a lot of money that are trying to make a huge impact in Europe. And every time there is friction or something that arises within ARTEF that's really felt externally, we're still subject to institutional and systemic racism in what we do, and that's really felt.
Can I just say, we at the BFI support ARTEF, so we pay into them and have done since the beginning. I just think the fact that an anti-racist task force for European film exists is an incredibly powerful and impressive thing, and so necessary. So I just wanted to throw my full weight of support behind everything that they do publicly.
Thank you. And a huge thank you to Hessen too.
Big up Hessen.
Just I'm going to switch back to numbers and statistics because that's always fun.
Bring it down, Quentin. Just
yeah, that's the only. I'm a white man. I'm part of the problem, so I can just look at numbers and try to. We switch back to question of statistics. For yesterday, the Collectif released a study about parity among in the official competition at Cannes, Berlin, and Venice. So we talk about parity. It's easy to calculate. We're far beyond. The festival is celebrating 33% of women directors selected in competition. We believe that it's not enough. If we were able legally to look at inclusion, representation of the country, we would be, we would be able to celebrate, not only just name and shame, but celebrate the second black women director selected in competition since 1946. We're not allowed to do that. So it's one thing to count, it's another thing to celebrate. Like do that. I'm going to be very transparent. Politically speaking, the French law it's something above the level of the Republic. It's a big value about not being able to do statistics like that. Question is, we are advocating to be able to celebrate and do that. At the same time, we hear voices saying, well, in France, if it were to happen, extremists, extreme right, parties from the extreme right would use the statistics in a bad way. Okay, we personally don't know at the level of Collectif where to stand on that, because so experiences from your other European countries on that matter, maybe on a wider angle than just cinema, but of course we, the Collectif 57 would have to build this negotiation from the way up, because it comes from the biggest, from the highest layers of the Republic. But do you have a take on that? We really don't know where to stand on that.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
No,
Go on.
I think the simplest solution to your problem is to have the work stand in the sun. I think we're so used to having work like this, it's done with embarrassment and shame, so it's done in a quiet corner in the dark. I think that if you open up the work, yes, collecting data will be equally harmful as it is helpful, but if the work is done in the sun, then that's up for public scrutiny. And so therefore, you're less likely to be damaging towards historically marginalized communities, because the global perspective, I hope, is still one of progress.
I think as well that, we're lucky in the UK that we have the Equalities Act, so we are allowed to ask those questions, and I recognise the sort of privilege of that. But I think we often get caught on the inability to collect data, right? So that we can't do diversity and inclusion because we can't collect data, and therefore we're stuck at the first hurdle. And I think, I have read all of the GDPR law. That's how interesting I am. And I know that there are exceptions around research and improving things for diversity and inclusion. The reason those laws exist are about not discriminating against people, and that is absolutely the opposite of what you're trying to do when you are collecting this data. So I think with permission, with asking people if they want to volunteer that data so they know what it's for and exactly who's going to be using it, I still think there is a way. Maybe politically it doesn't seem possible, but I still think there is a way to gather data as you have done in a sort of perceived way. You can do desktop data, which is what I did for the Black Star research as well. So there is a way to start. And Veerfeld in Film did that as a research project, as academics that did that research project. So I don't believe that you can't do it at all. Arrest me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe it can't be done at all. And even if it could not possibly be done, there are so many other things that can happen, because anecdotally or not, there's a problem. That there's a problem with those numbers, right? So there is a way to start thinking about what that looks like. You can literally count it on screen. So that something's going on. So there are ways that you can do something to start moving the picture forward without getting caught up in starting in the right way. We don't have our data collection 100% sorted. I'm not going to sit here and be like, we do it all properly and it's all great. We don't, but we know where to start. We've set targets. We collect some. We do some of that analysis. We make it open and clear, but we also do a lot of other stuff, and I think that's really important to note as well.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience? Maybe.
Thank you so much. I'm Zara Benasra. I'm from Belgium, and I'm a sales agent. And we already talked about the person in the representation in front of the camera, behind, and talking about industry and film already done. But something that I really wonder and I question is the accessibility to train, to go to film school, which is really the basis. And do you collaborate with film school? Do you have access to, because we know that we cannot show films that already don't exist if we are not trained for that. So thank you so much.
I mean, as a BF, with my BFI hat on, the BFI does collaborate with film schools somewhat. like the National Television Film School or the London Film School, doing workshops developing talent. They also, I think it's less of a concern in the UK because we do monitor data and we do look at data of applicants coming into film school. And when thinking about development, so we're also a film funder, so we have the diversity standards, which implemented means that we do have a certain level of diversity that has to qualify to, that it has to be on screen to qualify for any of our funding. So that work is germinating in the UK. And I do believe anecdotally that work is coming, but I understand your frustrations about where it is now because we've waited far too long to wait another 50, 100 years for some work to be done. So yeah, that's why I can offer.
Yeah, and you know, in the UK, I don't know what it's like in Europe, but you have to pay to go to film school, and it's really expensive, right? So I mean, that's an immediate barrier. So whilst they do have some scholarships and you know, incentives for diverse applicants to apply, that is a real problem. We do have things like our Film Academy as well, so we sort of help to run and fund academies that train people all around the UK. So there are things that we do with like Interfilm as well, which goes into schools and talks about career pathways. So yeah, but I agree, there just needs to be, it's just more, it's the whole thing, isn't it? You know, it's not just film school, it's not just, you know, production funding, it's not just it's the whole picture that you recognize all the barriers that stop it all from happening.
And then after you've got through production, it's also, you know, sales, distribution and exhibition. So it's a collective thing. And with my ARTEF hat on, we do anti-racist training with various different organizations, and we hope that by implementing that we'll start to develop more equitable and ethical routes for historically marginalized people to join the industry.
Yeah, at Collectif 50/50, we also do intervention in school. We have a mentorship program in partnership with Netflix, and we also do some trainings. But I guess this is something that we should address more in the future.
Hi, hello everyone, and thank you for your insight. It was very insightful. So my name is Miriam Sidikou. I'm a scriptwriter and also director and member of the Collectif 50/50 as a mentee. That was great. I would like to talk about, also we were talking about representation because we know that representation matters, and all the film industry is helping people feel connected to whatever is broadcasted on the screens, but we are not talking about the very near and dear point of the industry, which is the money, because starting with the Collectif 50/50, they were analyzing the blockbusters in France, and my question will come is two-sided. First, how people from the diversities are paid in your countries. Is it improving really, or is it still behind? And also, not only talking about comedians, I mean actors and actresses, but also technicians, because I know from a new association called DV+, which was actually inspired by the British industry, and more specifically director William Stephen Smith from Top Boy, that you do have certain access and lists of people from people of color, let's say that, to work on the different project, and also partake in mentorship. And why I'm asking this is because, yes, we are talking about European level because we are, I mean, it's our territory, but when we also look at the places where people say it has improved, such as the US, which is also another territory, we will, I remember Viola Davis saying, okay, but look at this, I'm still struggling, and I'm paid way below my white colleagues, and I'm doing so much more. So I'm interested into that. Do you have some information you'd like to share about what you know from your own countries?
I can't answer that question very well because we don't have the data ready, to be honest. Mainly because we are not allowed to collect much of the data that would be needed to base any survey on at the moment. So I'm not very good at answering that question. I don't know how you guys see it in the UK.
We wouldn't have that data necessarily for production because we're just like, it's just crap. Like data collection around production is crap. But we do, as an institution, volunteer. So in the UK, it is a legal requirement that you publish your gender pay gap data. But we voluntarily publish our ethnicity pay gap, our disability pay gap, and our LGBTQIA+ pay gap as well for the people that we employ. So I can say, I don't have the up-to-date figures, but I think
it's 7%. I think it's 7% for gender.
Yeah, for gender, it's nearly the same. I think ethnicity was about 16% disparity. So, and for disability, it was a similar amount. So the LGBTQ, I think, was about the same as well. So, so that again, that data is helpful because we can publish that data, and it helps us to understand what needs to happen. And we know that people get stuck and don't progress. And I think what happens in the BFI is reflective of what happens in the industry. So I'm sure it's the same. We have specificity in our diversity standards that Rico was talking about. So standard C is about training opportunities, paid training opportunities, mentorship opportunities, and retention and progression in the industry. So whether you're stepping people up, so that's specifically looking at doing that for people from historically marginalized groups. So there, there is stuff in place, but I agree. Money, we know that people don't get funded as much. Like all of these things exist. We know those are the barriers. So, part of what we're trying to do is tear all of that down so that people have access to the money to be able to do the work that they need to do.
I mean, equally, the problem is that, as I'm sure you know, when you're historically marginalized, you're usually sitting at the lowest level of your organization, and those changes generally don't come from our level. They have to come from the top.
And diversity brings audience, and the audience brings money. Yeah. It's a conclusion, no?
Yeah. Any other questions? There is another one.
Yes, hi, my name is Rabia El Khouri. I resigned a month ago from my position as diversity manager from a German institution after 4 years. And I wanted to answer one of the questions that have been raised, what is missing today. I think we need to trust the people who do the work a tiny bit more. We need to empower these people. You feel all alone in your institution, fighting all the white people around you. You might have some colleagues, which is a very good thing, but also the others want to shoot you in the leg. So for me, there should be a bit more respect and understanding for the diversity, inclusion, equity jobs in our institutions. There should be also a bit more respect for people of color who are coming to take these positions that have never existed before, so it's all fresh territory. And there also should be a bit more the need to collaborate, to push these institutions forward. We're not doing this for us, we're doing this for you as well. So this concept of trust and empowerment is something that I think is completely missing. Everyone wants to do diversity today, which is fantastic, but once it is about changing a minor thing, no, we've always done it like that, we can't do it, this has always functioned this way. So I think money is very important, of course, but human nature is also very important. I think we need to respect a tiny bit more these people who are taking these very difficult positions.
I absolutely resonate with that as someone that just resigned from my job for very similar reasons.
Because of me.
Not because of the inclusion team, because of this systemic nature of the organization. And like when we talk about inclusion, we break it down to like 4 main parts, right? People, policy, practice, and partnerships. And what you're talking about, the people bit, is the culture, how people work together, and the clear pipelines for change to happen, the clear communications for people in these positions to speak to people in positions of power to have things enacted. And then you think about like policy, what do your policies in your organization look like? How are instances of racism held by your organization? How are instances of ableism held by your organization? And then there's the practice, the stuff that we actually do. So like for us, it's our ambition to get to 30% of the films we fund to be black and global majority, 30% of the films we show at South Bank to be black and global majority. But then the most important part is partnerships. Because ultimately some of our organizations that are white-led in this room shouldn't be leading this work. They should be partnering with black-led organizations or POC-led organizations and empowering them to lead this work. There's always an attitude in our industry, in inclusion and also in the screens industries, that if you're a historically marginalized person, you're talking about inclusion, you're talking about it because you're personally affected by it, and that completely eradicates any valid point you end up making, and that's a terrible, terrible thing about our industry.
Thank you. I think we had another question here.
Thank you. My name is Roland Urgin. I'm a French scriptwriter and director. And I have a question about diversity and strategies to bring more diversity, especially in cinema. And any one of you that can bring your opinion on that would be interesting to me. We are seeing more and more this strategy these days of stories that are meant to be played and connoted by white people being replaced by people coming from the diversity. And I think this sometimes has brought some frustration from both sides. And I would like to have your views on this strategy versus actually telling story of people coming from diversity, which would be maybe more genuine, but is it a necessity?
But I presume you're talking about things like colorblind casting, so something like Bridgerton, or period dramas. They often do this. I think there's a huge history of storytelling where this happens in theatre. Also, the assumption that black people didn't exist in history is wrong. They were there, and we just never represent them. So I think this kind of film is a creative art. We often tell stories, historical stories, in a fictional way that aren't true. So I don't understand why it becomes a problem when you're talking about putting diverse stories on screen, or women on screen, or black people on screen, or disabled people on screen who haven't been. So from my point of view, I'd like to see all stories being told about everybody. So the more people I see like me, and I've watched a lot of stories where there aren't people like me in film my whole life, the better. So I think authenticity, yes, is important. Stories being told in the right way is important. But fantasy and you can tell stories about blue people in the sea. So I don't understand why you can't have a black queen on screen as well.
Sure. And it's the same for women. I mean, there is a lot of film right now. I think about Les Trois Mousquetaires, par exemple, par Ouda Benyamina, where it's women who are going to play the character when originally it was men in the book. So I think there is always a debate about that, but it's just fantasy, it's just fiction.
I also feel like there's a difference between replacing a character with the characters from a protected characteristic and developing that character authentically. I don't believe that we should be just replacing characters with characters from protected characteristics. I believe that we should be doing colorblind casting and then revisiting the script and developing characters authentically to be able to do that. And that is authentic authorship.
Which is what Queen Charlotte did, I think. I was just watching that recently. I thought it did an amazing job of, addressing race in that character where it didn't exist historically, but it's still a really amazing, fascinating story that it probably exists somewhere in the world. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's okay.
Maybe one last word from the panelists. How can we collaborate? How can we do partnership with you, with your organizations? How do you work together?
You can reach out to us We are very collaborative. We openly have conversations with anyone who wants to engage with us, as long as those conversations are fruitful for the work, as long as they develop anti-racist practice at ARTEF.org. ARTEF@artef.org. Yes, that's the one.
I mean, we're public institutions, so we can be reached anytime, and we're a learning organization in a sense that we are constantly learning about discourses and moving forward in any aspect of diversity and inclusion. And we do partner up. We also support ARTEF, happily so. We also support other institutions and initiatives, and try to sort of learn for us, but also educate the industry, inform, communicate, and in that sense, that's an ongoing process, and I love it.
At the Collectif 50-50, we do act on the French market, but for instance, 2 days ago we had a very, very interesting panel with sister collectives from the US, the UK, from Brazil, from Egypt, and the exchange of experience on how we actually do the work with local institutions was very enlightening, and is something that we encourage to do. So even if you are not French, we are eager to receiving and discussing with you and exchanging experience, because we need to work together on all of these matters. So frontiers should not be a barrier for that. Thank you.
Just to say that this diversity barometer is considered in the sector as a reference to each year move editorial lines, but of course for the time being it worked quite well, but we still got a lot to do. And it's important to understand that the counting and the analyzing is the beginning of how you make changes and progress. So we have to make changes and progress together in this kind of collective ambition and will to move things.
Okay, well, thank you very much for staying and for being here, because it was not an easy panel to have here at Cannes Film Festivals. So thank you, and applause.